Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thanks so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So there can be a lot of benefits to having a weekday wedding. A lot of times your venue and other vendors can be cheaper. It's a lot easier to book your dream vendors as you aren't having to compete with other couples for that very busy Saturday wedding. However, there can also be a lot of challenges when coordinating a weekday wedding as well. So here are 6 tips if you are considering a weekday wedding. Weekday weddings work really well if you're having a destination wedding. If you and the majority of your guests are traveling to an outside location other than where you all live, it works really well to have a weekday wedding as people are taking the time off anyways, so it really doesn't matter at what point in your trip you are having your wedding day. This can offer you a lot more flexibility when it comes to hiring vendors or maybe even saving money depending on the location if you're having a weekday wedding. Regardless of if it is a destination wedding or not, tip number 1 is to ensure that the venue that you have your eye on actually offers weekday weddings. Sometimes venues can double in their function and maybe they aren't available for weddings during the week as they serve another purpose on weekdays. So just make sure that if there are venues that you have in mind that you would love to get married at, that a weekday is even an option at that spot. Number 2, check in with all of the really important people in your life, your friends, your family, those that absolutely have to be at your wedding, and make sure that they can be able to swing a weekday wedding. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into this as far as coordinating work schedules and vacation time and that sort of thing when it comes to a weekday. So make sure that those that you really want there would be able to attend your wedding if it was on a weekday. Hot tip, this is a great way to kind of weed out guests if you're trying to have a smaller wedding but you feel inclined to have to invite a certain amount of people. Having a weekday wedding is probably going to weed out a lot of your guests and shrink that guest list pretty easily if you're having difficulty doing that on your own. Number 3, transportation. If you are hiring a transportation company that utilizes school buses, this in particular is something to make sure that you are aware of. If you're having a weekday wedding and the company contracts out school buses, those are going to be utilized during the week if it's during the school year. And even if it's not during the school year, sometimes there's camps, summer camps, sports teams that are using school buses. So understand that that might be a conflict if you are using transportation companies that use school buses, and this might either require to go a different route or to just make sure that you have your event starting late enough that this won't be a conflict. Number 4, kind of speaking of, have an evening or a later ceremony and reception. A lot of times in the summer, a very popular start time for ceremonies is like 3, 4, 5 o'clock. If you are having a weekday wedding, I highly recommend pushing this all a little bit later and having like a 5 p.m. ceremony and reception to follow. That way, if people are able to get work off or if they're able to take work off just a little bit early and be able to attend your wedding, it's going to be a lot easier for them to swing if it is later in the day. Having a weekday wedding is also a great option for those that are not necessarily big dancers or big partiers. Like, you don't necessarily need to have some big after party reception. You want to have some light dancing, have your kind of first dance, your parent dances, and some light dancing, but not necessarily a rager that a lot of these weekend weddings turn into. So a weeknight wedding is a great way to kind of handle that without having to feel like you're cutting the time short or lowering the expectations of your guests for the kind of experience that they will be having at your wedding if it were on a weekend. Having a weeknight wedding kind of does that for you, where you can wrap things up a little bit early. It's a little bit easier to do a more like formal exit if that's something you want to do, have an actual send-off at your wedding and make sure that your whole guests are going to be there and it's not going to be just this tiny little group of people that are left in the wee hours of the morning after a big after party. You can have a little bit more of an intimate experience and a formal send-off and be able to wrap things up in the night a little bit earlier. And finally, number 6, if you are considering a weekday wedding, it is said that Mondays and Thursdays are usually the best days to do this, as it's either the beginning of the week or the end of the week, and it's a little bit easier for people to either take a long weekend and extend that through Monday or be able to take Friday off and be able to attend your wedding on a Thursday if they have to travel to be in attendance. Again, this doesn't really matter for destination weddings, but if you're having a local wedding and want to do it on a weeknight, typically Mondays and Thursdays are the best days to do that. We've been seeing a huge increase in non-Saturday weddings in the last couple of years, and I expect that to continue. And while weekday weddings are never going to be popular, I don't think. Saturdays are always going to be our popular wedding day. We are seeing an increase in weekday weddings. So if you are considering a weekday wedding, follow these tips, and hopefully that will help you in that process. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.